this morning, we'd like to start with a presentation from ETC. Chris Tatham is here. I think Jason's going to introduce him to talk about a survey done regarding transit.
So, good morning, Mayor and Council. Pleased to report that the Public Transportation and Parking Department has just recently completed our rider and non-rider survey. And as you may recall, the last time we conducted a survey such as this was back in 2011. And that 2011 survey actually opened up some serious discussion and dialogue about improving transit in Oklahoma City, shed some light on the need for the transit system analysis that Council requested, and then, as we know, the eventual implementation of some of those recommendations in that study in 2014. So these type of surveys are very important for us, not only in planning transit for the future, but also in reporting regularly to the citizens how we're performing in terms of performance measures that are tied to our strategic business plan. So our plans moving forward with our survey process are to survey our customers each year. We'll do a non-rider survey every other year, and we are also in the process of developing some specialized surveys, one to help us learn better ways to communicate with the Hispanic market in terms of discussing the benefits of public transportation, and then also a survey for downtown residents. And so with that, I'd like to welcome back Chris Tatham with ETC, and he'll share the survey findings with you.
It's great to be back, mayors and members of the council. I know most of you are familiar with our work for the city's annual customer satisfaction survey and priorities survey. But the next slide actually shows kind of our locations around the country, and ETC Institute is actually the nation's leading transit survey company. In fact, during the last 4 years, we've worked with more than 34 of the nation's largest transit organizations. So we're glad to be here to be able to share this information along with the other things that you're hearing today. As far as today, I thought I'd walk you through briefly the highlights of the non-rider survey, which is essentially a survey administered to people who aren't using transit service in the area to better understand why and what their attitudes are. We also surveyed people who are currently using the system, and then certainly if you have any questions, be more than happy to answer them. So, as far as the non-rider survey is concerned, one of the things that we looked at first, since we were going to be talking with folks who aren't currently using the service, is we really wanted to understand what they thought the importance of transit in the community is. Given that the majority of people don't use transit, do they care about it? What are the attributes of the service they would be interested in using, and what characteristics of the service are really most important to them? One of the things that we looked at as part of this study is when we did the survey for you previously this year, we had asked people what the top priorities were. And in order to really make sure we had comparable data, this survey actually assessed a previous slide, sorry. This actually was administered over 800 residents throughout the EMBARK service area in both English and Spanish. And the results aren't perfect, but they have an accuracy of about plus or minus 3.5% at the 95% level of confidence. One of the things that we did look at in this survey is really the priority of transit compared to other issues in the community. And if you recall, when I was here at the end of August, this is actually from that survey, as the public transit was actually the fourth most important service to residents. Clearly, condition of streets by far is the number one issue, as you saw when I presented before. When we actually did our analysis, which is shown on the next slide, of where the opportunities for improvement exist, you'll see again, condition of streets were clearly at the top of that list, but public transit, based on the lower satisfaction levels, given the relatively high priority, was the third overall rated opportunity for improvement moving forward when it comes to city services. In this survey that we did this year, we asked residents how important they thought it was for the city to basically investing in public transit for the future. And what you'll see is over half of the folks surveyed who don't currently use the service thought it was either extremely important or important. Another 24% thought it was some important. Only 8% of the people in the community thought it was not important. So for every person who's really passionate and thinks it's extremely important, there are 4 of them to every person in the community who doesn't think it is important at all. And this is among people who don't currently use it. And there's often some benefits that non-users see for having services like this in the community, and I'll share that in a little bit more next. We then looked at several transportation issues, and we wanted to find out, well, of all the transportation issues outside just repairing streets and the condition, what things did people in this community who aren't using transit care the most about? And interestingly, they were most concerned about services for elderly folks and disabled. You see, it was rated as the highest priority based on the percentage who picked it as a high priority or a priority. Widening roads and highways was next, and then building more sidewalks and trails rounded out the top 3 transportation improvements that residents who aren't using transit prioritized. The other thing that I was really impressed with is EMBARK's only really been in existence for a couple years, and most of the time it takes new transit organizations a long time for people to notice it. But in just 2 years, 2 out of 3 residents who aren't using it are aware and have heard of EMBARK. So you've done a very good job, at least, of raising awareness of the community of the new image in the organization. I think you should be commended on the efforts that the city's been doing in that area. In addition, one of the things that's been most effective are your bus stops. When we asked people how they figured it out, 63% said they learned about it from bus stops. A lot of people just couldn't really remember exactly where, but your investments in your bus stops have made a big difference in people's awareness of the new service. Some of the other things that we looked at, though, is even though people are familiar or aware of the service, most of them don't know how to use it or aren't real familiar, and that's actually a barrier to use. On the next slide, you'll see that of the people who were surveyed, most actually felt that they lived reasonably close to service access. Only 5% didn't think service was near their home, but you'll see that of those people surveyed, only 8% were very familiar. Another 20% said they were somewhat familiar. 60% said they weren't at all familiar. And that's a big barrier for use because most of the time people aren't, if they can drive to where they want to go, they're not going to take the time to learn how to use something. So it suggests that continued education and making it as easy for people to use the system as possible will be a key to see increased ridership. In addition, we wanted to find out whether people who had a choice, in other words, this group of people surveyed were your non-riders, most of which had cars and jobs. We wanted to find out whether or not they actually would even consider using transit. The perception is that culturally people maybe in this area just would never use transit. And you'll notice that 55% of the people surveyed in the dark blue said they'd consider it under the right conditions. And another 33% said they'd only ride if they had no other transportation. And then 12% said they wouldn't even ride it if it was free. But you at least have half the folks in the community under the right conditions that would consider using it. Very small percentage of the population currently uses transit, so even if a small portion of that 55% decided to use it, you could see a potentially significant increase in transit ridership in the community. In addition, the things that were most important to the people who were not currently using it, you'll see on-time performance, frequency of service, and information were the 3 things that they cared the most about. So in order to overcome some of the barriers to use, people who aren't currently using it have to believe it's going to be on time. The frequency of service has to be levels that they think are reasonable, and frankly, they have to know how to use it and where to use it and how to get access to it. If those 3 things aren't met, it's going to be difficult to get people who aren't currently riding to decide to start riding it. The other thing that we looked at as part of the survey are people who are actually using the current service. And this was really to better understand who the people who are currently out there. A lot of times there's perceptions that maybe the people who are writing it don't have jobs or they're all on welfare or they just need social service. So we wanted to really find out, well, who are they? And we also wanted to see if there were many changes since the last survey was done in 2011. So one of the things that we did is we conducted this survey about a year ago. We just did the survey here recently, so we'll have new data available in a few weeks, but this was conducted to over 1,000 of your current riders, and so the results are very accurate within about plus or minus 2.5% at the 95% level of confidence. One of the things that we found is that there's a lot of new riders. This next chart shows that people who had been using it just 6 months to a year has actually gone from 9% to 15%. And you can see if you add in the 6 months or less, it stayed the same. But we had a significant number of folks who are riding it now for the first time for less than a year compared to a couple years ago. So some of the changes that you've made are attracting new people to the system. The other thing that we found out is that the people who are currently using it are mainly in the workforce. And you'll notice on this next chart that 50% of the people surveyed were either employed full or part-time. Another 17% were looking for work. So 2 out of 3 people who are using transit actually are in the labor force. Many of them are doing jobs that the service sector and others definitely needs, and without transit, they wouldn't have another opportunity or other ways to get to work. And when we asked them specifically what their purpose of their current trip was, you'll see that about 4 in 10 were using it to get to and from work, and you can see a variety of other things. The biggest change since the last survey is more folks are using it to go shopping and do errands. And so the ability to do that as part of the service and get more things done is probably one of the reasons you're attracting new people to the system. Another thing that we looked at was just generally how satisfied folks were. And you'll notice on the next chart that the overall ratings for EMBARK services are actually really good among the current riders. In fact, I'll have you focus on the percentage of folks that gave below average or poor ratings. You'll see in just about every case, it's around 10% or fewer were really dissatisfied. In fact, you'll see courtesy of drivers has 38% rating as excellent, so there's a real strong brand equity. And you'll look just through the list of items, and most every item has a quarter or more in most cases of the residents or the people who are using transit give excellent ratings. So overall, the people using it think it's good. The problem is you have a lot of people in the community who don't know enough about it. And so again, there are barriers to usage just because they're not aware of what the service is and how to access it. One of the other things we wanted to find out is that many of the riders have to go through a lot of transfers. This is one of the challenges. Most of you, if you were to get out there, probably don't want to transfer a lot of times to get to your destination. But you'll notice that only a third or 32% said they essentially got on the bus and then got off. Of those who had to take a transfer, you'll see that the other 68% had to take at least one transfer, and almost half of the people had to take 2 or more transfers. So that means to get from destination A to B, you've got to make a lot of moves and wait times, and that's going to certainly be a barrier to usage in the future. And that's one of the things that was somewhat higher here than we've seen in other communities. The nice thing that we did is this survey is we wanted to find some opportunities to do better. In other words, at the end of the day, what are the things to focus on? And we broke it down into 2 types of riders. There's one type that we consider choice riders. These are people who have cars, earn decent levels of income, and could have a choice to not use transit. And among those types of people, the things that were most important or identified as the highest opportunity, this is similar to the analysis that you've seen in the direction finder survey we do each year, where the things to the right are more important than the things to the left, and the things at the top are rated better than those at the bottom. So we tend to focus on those things in the bottom right, and you'll see that the helpfulness of transit staff, making sure buses arrive on time, and frequencies of service. Interestingly, you remember on the non-rider survey what the top 3 priorities were that people cared about using: information, on-timeness, and making sure that they would the service frequency. So the same thing that your current riders are saying are the things you should emphasize are exactly the same thing that the non-riders said they needed to attract. So if you want to get more choice riders, those are clearly the 3 things to continue to work on. Among your transit-dependent riders, things that they cared the most about is how easy it was to locate stops, frequency of service, and they just want to feel safe while they're riding the buses. And that's, again, one of the ways to keep people who don't have a choice to make sure that they continue to feel like good customers and that they're taken care of and safe in the transit services that they use. We also narrowed it down to a lot of individual things, and we had folks pick one item that they thought would be the thing they'd like to see improved most. And you'll see that 28% of the folks picked more routes to more places, 20% wanted to see buses running more until midnight on weekends, and then more shelters and stops was the third highest selected item of the amenities and improvements that were rated. In addition, I know you've invested a lot in sidewalks and benches, so we wanted to find out whether it made any difference to people. So one of the things that we actually looked at is whether or not the people who were using it had access just to sidewalks and benches, sidewalk shelters, whether all 3 amenities were available at the location they typically board. And then we looked at their overall satisfaction rating for the transit service. And what we found out is the percentage of good and excellent didn't change dramatically. In other words, people were still generally just as satisfied, but you'll notice that the percent who gave negative responses was significantly reduced when all 3 amenities were available. Just 4.4% of those surveyed indicated that they gave below average or poor ratings compared to 12.2% overall. So it did make a big difference in reducing the negative experiences, which are likely to increase your ability to retain people once they start using the service. The last thing is just to summarize some of the key things that we found. I think you could feel really good that your current service is certainly meeting the needs of your current riders. The overall satisfaction ratings were very good, and there was a very high percentage of folks who gave excellent ratings. Regardless of whether people use transit or not, your non-riders actually think it's really important for the city to have transit ridership, and I think that's one of the reasons in the citywide survey, it's not the most important issue, but it ranks in the top 3 to 4 every year. The service clearly is helping the local economy, that 2 out of 3 people are using it to get to and from work, and really all the service improvements are likely that are being considered are probably going to have a positive impact that you're looking at right now moving forward. So again, just wanted to bring you up to speed of what your current riders think, and also share with you some of the barriers that are keeping people who are not riding from using the transit services that you're developing. And with that, I don't know if there are any questions, Mayor, but we'd be happy to answer them.
All right, any questions on the survey about EMBARK?
How do we compare with other communities about our size?
Your overall satisfaction rate is actually really good. I haven't done specific benchmarks. Your survey is not exactly like the other communities. That's one difference with the citywide survey we do every year. The questions are identical, but I can say just when you look at the satisfaction rating, it's very good. One of the big barriers is the way your system works and how many times people have to transfer. That makes it really hard for someone who wants to get from place A to place B simply. It makes it a burden to use, and that's one of the, even though the service is good, it's difficult to use, and so you've got those two things, I guess, going for you and against you compared to other communities.
Thanks.
All right.
Just curious, was there any discussion at NLC about how autonomous vehicles, share riding, could impact transit in the years to come?
I do believe there was a session to deal with it, but I didn't attend that particular session. I think it was a short session. It was like 15, 20 minutes in the exhibit hall, but I didn't get a chance to attend that.
The Spokies with Cars concept is intended to provide people with an option not to have a car and to use the Spokies with Cars for certain of their transportation needs, which would then by logic follow that they would use the public transit where it was suitable for that. So you would go public transit and the Spokie for car approach.
Thank you. And thanks for including the part on the shelters. I thought that was the most powerful, and I appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much.
I have one more question. Are there statistics as to the percentage of people that utilize the bus system based on the size of the city?
Certainly, you can look at that.
I've always had the impression that we underutilize the system, and partly it's because of the system.
Yeah, even the census data will have mode of access to work, so you can look and find out how people in different communities actually get to work.
You know, there's a lot of differences. I mean, we've got the wide open spaces and everybody's got cars, and there's lots of differences, but it'd be just interesting to know the percentage. I'm excited about the possibility that COTPA is providing bus passes for high school kids. I think that's a good way to build at the base, get people started riding the system. It'll obviously increase ridership while not increasing revenues, but it'll increase ridership, and I think that's a way to change that perception about it, starting there. I want to make a comment about this. When Rick Kane left, I had the feeling that that I need to hold my breath with regard to what was going to happen in public transit. And I will tell you that you have done a great job, and I appreciate it very much what you've done. You had big shoes to follow, and or to fill, and to follow also, I guess. But you've done a great job. All those holding my breath periods are past me now. I really do appreciate all you've done.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor.